Forget everything you think you know about ancient America. Picture towering earthen pyramids, not in Egypt or Mexico, but in the heart of what would become the United States. Imagine bustling cities with tens of thousands of inhabitants, complex social structures, intricate artistry, and a vibrant spiritual world that profoundly shaped their lives. Today we journey back nearly 1,000 years to explore one of the most sophisticated and enigmatic civilizations of pre-Columbian America. From the monumental earthworks of Cahokia to their intricate belief systems and the enduring mysteries that still surround them. Join us as we delve into the rise and eventual decline of the Mississippian culture. This is a history that demands to be heard. The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler.
And we're live on match day as Doug reaches for a buffalo wing. He's got it! Oh, and he's gone for a can of Pepsi too! What a finish! There's no doubt about it. It just tastes better. Match days deserve Pepsi.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Volume 4, The Medieval World. Episode 92, The Mississippian Culture. When we talk about the Mississippian culture, we're referring to a civilization believed to have thrived from around 800 CE, continuing up until the European colonisation of North America. But before we dive in, let's pause for a moment, because there's something incredibly important to clarify. When discussing the civilizations of Europe or Asia, we tend to follow a neat and linear trajectory. From Neolithic communities to the development of writing systems, the rise of kingdoms and empires, and eventually towards societies recognisably linked to the modern world. Even in cases where direct historical evidence is lacking, we often have secondary sources, accounts from travellers, traders or scribes, leaving behind clues that help historians reconstruct credible narratives. But in the Americas, the timeline takes an entirely different turn. Here we see a striking leap from cultures that, in many ways, were still living in early agricultural modes, directly into contact with the fully industrialised, literate and expansionist world of Renaissance Europe. And for centuries, this abruptness shaped a deeply flawed narrative. Early European observers often made dismissive assumptions, labelling indigenous societies as primitive or savage, framing their lands as fair game for conquest. These weren't analytical assessments, they were political justifications, part of a colonial mindset that enabled settlers to view their expansion as inevitable, even righteous. Only with the rise of critical and respectful historical scholarship have we begun to properly appreciate the complexity and achievements of these indigenous cultures. and today we focus on the so-called Mississippian culture, though even that name requires careful examination. The term Mississippian was coined by archaeologists to describe a cultural pattern, not a name used by the people themselves. It refers to a style of settlement, architecture, and ceremonial life focused around the Mississippi River Valley and its tributaries, rather than a single ethnic group or kingdom. So when we refer to the Mississippians, we're using a convenient academic term rather than the actual name of a people who identified themselves differently. They would have had their own tribal names, languages, and traditions, many of which have either been lost or absorbed into the histories of later indigenous groups. This makes studying the Mississippian culture somewhat comparable to analysing prehistoric Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt before writing. We are looking at material culture rather than written records. Instead of first-hand chronicles or royal inscriptions, we rely on evidence from mounds, pottery, and urban layouts, piecing together a story through archaeological findings rather than written accounts. And perhaps this is the greatest challenge when studying early American civilizations, understanding them on their own terms rather than through the lens of later European contact. It requires a blend of imagination, caution, and humility. Because these were not primitive societies waiting to be discovered. They were fully functioning civilizations with their own political systems, cosmologies, and artistic expressions. They simply didn't leave us the kind of evidence that fits neatly into the frameworks of European or Asian history. So as we begin our exploration of Mississippian culture, let's keep that perspective in mind. We're not uncovering some lost fragment of history. We're tuning into a parallel chapter of human civilization, one that was interrupted rather than concluded, and which still has much to teach us about the many ways human societies have shaped the world. The Mississippians are often regarded as the final major cultural tradition in North America before the arrival of European explorers in the 16th century. But to truly understand who they were, and more importantly, where they fit into the wider tapestry of North American history, we must see them not as an isolated phenomenon, but as part of a much longer cultural lineage. Early European colonists quickly realised that the lands they had stumbled upon were far from untouched wilderness. Instead, they found themselves walking through the ruins of centuries-old civilizations marked by a level of sophistication they had not expected. Perhaps the most striking evidence of these lost societies lay in the vast man-made mounds scattered across the Midwest and the South. Massive earthen constructions that could hardly have been built by the nomadic tribes Europeans believed they had encountered. When we refer to the Mississippian culture, we generally mean the period between 800 CE and the early 1600s, right up to the time of first sustained contact with European settlers. But mound building, that stretches back thousands of years before the Mississippians even existed. Mound building was not their invention, but it became one of the most iconic features of their cultural expression. The act of building mounds is not unique to North America. It is a universal feature of human civilization. Once people began living in permanent cooperative communities, developing the organisation and population required for large-scale construction, the impulse to build upwards to honour gods, leaders or the cosmos seems to have taken hold. The oldest known mound in North America is found at Watson Break near the Washita River in present-day Louisiana. It dates to around 3,500 BCE. That's over 5,000 years ago, and more than 4 millenniums before the rise of the Mississippian tradition. And there's a pattern. Almost all of these ancient mound sites are near rivers. Indeed, river systems were the lifeblood of mound building cultures. The Mississippian culture itself takes its name not from the modern state of Mississippi, but from the Mississippi River, winding southwards from the upper Midwest to the Gulf of Mexico. The Washita River, incidentally, eventually flows into the Mississippi too. So let's be clear, mound builders existed long before Mississippians emerged. The Mississippian culture was not born from a sudden migration or invasion, rather it was a gradual evolution, a continuation and refinement of practices already thousands of years old. The Mississippians were not a nation nor a single people. They represented a broad cultural horizon marked by urbanisation, intensive agriculture, and increasingly complex societal structures. These groups remained tribal with no central political identity, but their ways of life had evolved far beyond their ancestors. And while mound building was a defining feature, it wasn't unique to them. What set Mississippian mounds apart was their scale and purpose. Many were tall, flat-topped platforms likely used for temples, elite residences, or ceremonial gatherings. Others took animal effigy forms, shaped into serpents, birds, and other symbolic creatures. This urge to build towering structures, often serving no apparent practical function, is a recurring instinct in human civilization. From the pyramids of Egypt to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, from the temples of Mesoamerica to China's burial mounds, humans across the world have shown an enduring impulse to reach towards the heavens. As is often the case with pre-Columbian American history, the Mississippians left no written records. Before European explorers arrived in the 15th and 16th centuries, there was no indigenous tradition of writing to preserve their stories. So when the first Europeans laid eyes on Mississippian mounds, they were utterly baffled. Early explorers and historians speculated wildly. Some simply refused to believe that the Native American societies they encountered could have built such grand structures. Instead, they proposed outlandish theories that the mounds must have been built by a lost race, possibly Phoenicians, Romans, or even Atlanteans. Of course, today we know better. Thanks to modern archaeology, we can date these mounds with precision. We know that the Mississippian culture arose around 800 CE and that it inherited and elaborated upon a mound building tradition already flourishing for millenniums. Take for instance Poverty Point, another site in Louisiana, constructed in the 2nd millennium BCE, around 1,000 years after Watson Break, but still more than 2,000 years before Mississippian times. By the 1st millennium BCE, we begin to see the rise of the Adena culture flourishing along the Ohio River Valley, marking the start of what we call the Woodland period, the era directly preceding the Mississippian tradition.
Cahokia.
When we speak of the Mississippian culture, one name towers quite literally above the rest: Cahokia. For those of us who study ancient history, we marvel at the enduring majesty of Egypt's stone pyramids, or find ourselves captivated by the awe-inspiring ruins of Mesoamerica. Cities like Teotihuacan, with its immense stone temples and meticulously aligned urban landscapes. Yet just as astonishing, and far too often overlooked, is what was happening 1,000 years ago in the heart of North America. Imagine journeying along the Mississippi River, cutting through what we now know as Illinois. As you drift southward, the tree line parts, revealing something extraordinary on the horizon. A great earthen mound rising above the plains, an ancient feat of engineering that defies modern expectation. The mound, known today as Monk's Mound, is the largest prehistoric earthen structure in the Americas. At its peak, it may have stood even taller than it does now, its loftier form gradually slumping under the weight of centuries. After all, unlike Egypt's Great Pyramids, it was made not of stone, but of layer upon layer of earth, painstakingly hauled basket by basket in a truly monumental communal effort. To put its scale into perspective, Monk's Mound rivals the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, and even invites comparison to the Great Pyramid of Giza. Let that sink in. Right there, just across the river from modern-day St. Louis, stood one of the greatest constructions of the pre-Columbian world. At the heart of this site lies what we now call Cahokia, though much like Monk's Mound, that name is a modern invention applied centuries after the city had faded from prominence. We simply don't know what its inhabitants called it. But thanks to archaeology, we know that Cahokia was once the thriving hub of a highly organised, spiritually driven and commercially connected society. Excavations have uncovered projectile points and other artefacts, suggesting this region may have been occupied as early as 600 or 700 CE, predating the height of Mississippian culture itself. It's likely that the people we identify as Mississippians were descendants of these earlier settlers, gradually transforming their urban centre into something truly remarkable. There's no clear evidence of a sudden break in occupation, supporting the idea of continuous development over generations. Atop Monk's Mound, historians believe there once stood a wooden temple dominating the skyline, assuming you weren't already overwhelmed by the mound beneath it. This suggests a deeply spiritual function, perhaps reserved for elites or a priestly class, elevated both physically and symbolically above the wider population. Below, the city likely pulsed with life. Cahokia thrived on agriculture, with maize, the lifeblood of Mississippian agriculture, at the heart of their diet. Other crops supplemented their meals, but maize was the foundation of their sustenance and economy. Their houses were pit dwellings, simple sunken homes, not unlike those built by early semi-nomadic societies in places such as ancient Japan. These structures were insulated, functional, and perfectly suited to a society on the verge of urban expansion. And the mighty Mississippi River, it was their motorway, their high-speed rail, their transcontinental trade route, all in one, enabling commerce, transport and cultural exchange on a scale comparable to the great rivers of Mesopotamia or Egypt. Archaeological evidence at Cahokia also reveals elaborate ceremonial burials, complete with high-status grave goods. This suggests a clear social hierarchy, a structured society with leaders, spiritual figures, and perhaps a hereditary elite. And this makes sense. Across global history, we see that large populations don't just self-regulate. They require leaders, rituals, and shared beliefs to hold everything together. One of the most fascinating discoveries at Cahokia is a circular arrangement of wooden posts, likely used as a solar calendar. Think of it as Woodhenge rather than Stonehenge, helping the Mississippians track the seasons, an essential survival tool in an agricultural society dependent on precise planting and harvesting cycles. At its peak, Cahokia may have housed as many as 20,000 people, making it the largest city north of Mesoamerica in the ancient world. Cahokia was a sprawling urban centre crowned by the largest man-made structure in what we now call the United States. And like many early societies, it was not left undefended. Palisades, strong wooden walls, were built around key areas of the city, complete with guard towers, suggesting a need for protection. Yet again, Cahokia mirrors the early urban experience the world over. Growth brings power, and power always attracts rivalry. So the next time you think of the ancient pyramids, or imagine the great cities of the ancient world, remember Cahokia, a place with no surviving written name, but a legacy that rises quite literally from the soil of Illinois. A testament to the creativity, ingenuity, and unity of the Mississippian peoples, a civilization far more advanced than many early European explorers were willing to acknowledge. And perhaps, as we rediscover its story, it is time Cahokia takes its rightful place among the great cities of history, not just as an anomaly, but as a thriving civilization that left its mark on the world.
The wider world.
Cahokia stands as what many historians consider the heartland of Mississippian culture. Due to its central importance, scholars often refer to it as part of the Middle Mississippian region. If we were to travel south, following the current of the mighty Mississippi River, we would eventually arrive at its confluence with the Ohio River. The Ohio River, winding its way southwest from modern-day Pennsylvania, covers hundreds of miles before finally merging with the Mississippi. Branching off from the Ohio River is a smaller tributary known as Ohio Bush Creek, and nestled along its banks is one of ancient North America's most enigmatic earthworks, Serpent Mound. This is no ordinary mound. It isn't a burial site, nor a platform mound like those seen at Cahokia. Serpent Mound is an effigy, a vast winding representation of a serpent coiled sinuously along a ridge overlooking the creek. Its body twists and curves with extraordinary precision, culminating in what appears to be an open mouth encircling either an egg or the sun. Whatever the intended symbolism, it remains a mesmerizing sight, a testament to the artistic and spiritual traditions of the people who shaped it. Who built the serpent? The debate continues. Now, here's where things get interesting and a little controversial. Despite its grandeur, Serpent Mound doesn't sit within the middle Mississippian cultural zone, and so it cannot be directly attributed to the people of Cahokia and their contemporaries. Its location some distance to the east places it in territory inhabited by entirely different peoples. Some researchers argue that Serpent Mound was built by the Adena culture, a civilization that predates the Mississippians by several centuries. Others suggest it may have been the work of the Fort Ancient culture, who were active in the region during Cahokia's peak. There are even claims that it could be far more recent, potentially constructed with a deep understanding of Mississippian ceremonial styles, but applied to a distinct cultural group altogether. The Fort Ancient people exclusive to the upper Ohio River Valley were distinct from the Mississippians, but not entirely disconnected. While they maintained their own cultural practices, we can observe elements of Mississippian influence in their artifacts, particularly in their ceramics. The shape of Fort Ancient pottery vessels and the materials used in their creation show clear signs of Mississippian inspiration, pointing to trade, exchange, or cultural emulation. Here we have a tantalizing question. Just how far did Mississippian culture reach? If it could influence ceramic traditions hundreds of miles away, was it widely recognized across the continent? And if so, was it admired, feared, or both? One thing we do know, Mississippian culture was enthusiastically adopted in the southeastern United States. In fact, its cultural footprint became so prominent that historians today refer to that region as the domain of the South Appalachian Mississippian culture, despite its location well to the east of the Mississippi River Valley proper. How did this cultural adoption happen? There are two prevailing theories. The first is migration. People from core Mississippian regions may have moved eastward, bringing their customs, technologies, and beliefs with them. The second is cultural competition. As communities in the southeast came into contact with the more advanced and prosperous Mississippian societies to their northwest, they may have adopted Mississippian traits out of necessity to remain competitive, to bolster their spiritual authority, or to elevate their social complexity. Whatever the case, by the height of Mississippian influence, around 1100 to 1200 CE, we see its hallmarks spreading across much of the eastern half of what is now the United States. From Illinois to Georgia, from Arkansas to the Carolinas, echoes of the Mississippians can be found in mounds, pottery, and societal structures. So, whether through trade, migration, or cultural imitation, the Mississippian world was not isolated. It was part of a vast network of societies, each shaped by the land they lived on and the neighbours they interacted with, sometimes peacefully, sometimes through conflict. And even if we still puzzle over who exactly built Serpent Mound, its very existence is a testament to the richness and diversity of ancient North America, long before the arrival of Europeans. The story of the Mississippians doesn't end at Cahokia or even the Mississippi Valley. Their influence flowed just like the rivers they depended upon, shaping the continent in ways we are only just beginning to understand.
Lifestyle.
To support the compelling theory that Mississippian culture was both far-reaching and deeply influential, we need look no further than the extraordinary burial sites within its ceremonial centres, most notably Mound 72 at Cahokia. Unlike the platform mounds used for temples and public buildings, Mound 72 is a burial mound, and arguably the most significant of its kind at the site. Here archaeologists have uncovered the remains of individuals adorned with shell and copper ornaments, clearly suggesting that they held elite status within society, likely political, military or spiritual leaders. Their burials were far from ordinary. The sheer scale and ceremonial complexity of Mound 72 reveals a culture deeply invested in ritual, hierarchy, and the symbolism of power. Even more chilling, however, is the discovery of dozens of accompanying skeletons, many buried in ways that suggest mass sacrifice. Some appear to have been arranged deliberately. Others show signs of trauma, while certain groups were laid out in strikingly symmetrical patterns. It's hard to interpret this as anything but the result of great planning, spiritual significance, and societal structure. A key factor in the Mississippians' rise to power was their embrace of maize farming. This agricultural shift wasn't native to the region. It likely migrated north from Mesoamerica, although the extent of cultural exchange between Mesoamerica and woodland societies remains a matter of scholarly debate. What we do know is this: maize revolutionized food production. Working hand in hand with native crops like squash, it formed the backbone of the Mississippian diet. This shift enabled a sedentary lifestyle, far more stable and prosperous than the semi-nomadic traditions of earlier cultures. The fertile riverbanks, particularly those of the Mississippi River, allowed for large-scale cultivation, making it possible for settlements to grow, eventually evolving into regional hubs of political and spiritual life. Of course, it wasn't all about maize. The Mississippians also developed advanced fishing techniques. One particularly ingenious method involved poisoning the water, not enough to harm humans, but sufficient to stun or kill fish, making them easier to collect. The rivers also yielded shellfish, and the shells weren't simply discarded. Instead, they were collected, carved, and engraved into beautiful artworks and ceremonial pieces. Many designs feature animals, anthropomorphic beings, and geometric patterns serving both decorative and ritualistic purposes. These artifacts frequently accompanied the deceased into the afterlife, found in burial sites like Mound 72, reflecting status and spiritual beliefs. Another hallmark of Mississippian craftsmanship lies in their pottery techniques. They tempered their clay with crushed shells, a clever innovation that prevented cracking during firing. This method was so effective that it spread north, migrating upriver into Fort Ancient territory, where it was gradually adopted, further illustrating the expanding reach of Mississippian influence. Mississippian pottery wasn't purely practical. Like their shell art and mound structures, it frequently carried spiritual significance, often taking the form of effigies, ceramic representations of animals, deities, and mythical figures, blending function with faith in the most elegant of ways. How did these large, complex societies sustain themselves? The answer lies in leadership and social hierarchy. Mississippian communities were not democratic assemblies of equals. They were structured into chiefdoms, societies governed by hereditary leaders, usually drawn from the military or spiritual elite. Chiefs weren't merely political figures, they were seen as divinely sanctioned leaders, guiding their people through both daily life and ceremonial duties. The difference between the ruling class and the common people is starkly visible in the archaeological record. Ordinary individuals were buried simply in local graves, often without elaborate rituals. The elite, however, were interred in monumental mounds like Mound 72, accompanied by grave goods, sacrificed individuals, and signs of elaborate funerary practices. This paints a picture of a society where status, religion, and leadership were inextricably linked, a highly organised, stratified civilization deeply invested in its mythology and power structures. Now that we've explored the Mississippian world, piecing together its culture, influence and organisation, it's time to shift our focus. What was it like for the first European explorers and settlers who stumbled upon the remnants, or in some cases, the last echoes of this great and mysterious culture? What did they see, and what did they misunderstand? And ultimately, what legacy did they leave behind?
Hernando de Soto.
So let's journey into the era of first contact, when European explorers, and one Hernando de Soto in particular, arrived in the lands once ruled by the Mississippians, and examine the lasting impact these encounters had on their culture. By the year 1300, signs of decline had begun to appear at Cahokia, the once glorious heart of Mississippian civilization. A telling symbol of this downturn lies in Monk's Mound, the largest structure at the site. Over time, earth began to slip down its flanks, and curiously, no attempt was made to repair it, a silent signal perhaps of dwindling resources, manpower or collective will. Why Cahokia was abandoned remains a mystery. Some suggest that the favourable climate of the medieval warm period may have come to an end, making agriculture more difficult. Others believe the city may have simply outgrown its resources. Overfarming, soil exhaustion, and rapid population growth could all have played a role in a gradual collapse. There is also speculation about devastating floods, which may have destroyed homes and fields, pushing survivors to seek new beginnings elsewhere. Whatever the case, it is likely that Cahokia was fully abandoned by around 1350. Although Cahokia had declined, Mississippian culture continued to flourish in various forms across a broad territory. By the early 16th century, Spanish explorers had begun turning their attention to North America following their initial discovery of the Florida Peninsula. Among these early explorers was Pánfilo de Narvaez, whose 1527 expedition to Florida was derailed by severe storms. He pressed on regardless, proposing to explore and colonize the land. It did not go well. Narvaez's expedition was a calamity. Half his men perished in a shipwreck en route, and of the roughly 300 who landed in Florida, only 4 survived. These lucky few endured nearly a decade of captivity, escape attempts, and desperate travel through hostile territory before eventually reaching Spanish Mexico. Narvaez himself died in 1528, likely of fever. That same year, another Spaniard, Juan Ortiz, arrived in Florida on a mission to find the doomed expedition, and ended up being captured himself. Fast forward to 1539, Hernando de Soto, a seasoned Spanish conquistador, was dispatched to La Florida by King Carlos of Spain, better known to us as Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. De Soto didn't arrive quietly. He brought with him over 600 men, fully equipped to establish a colony. Remarkably, De Soto encountered Juan Ortiz, who by then had spent over a decade among the native peoples. Fluent in local languages, Ortiz became the crucial interpreter between Spaniard and native, a rare bridge between worlds. Despite this advantage, the expedition was met with deep suspicion by the indigenous tribes, and De Soto was forced into a relentless march inland. Over the next 3 years, De Soto's journey would take him across the heart of South Appalachian Mississippian territory. He marched through lands that today form the US states of Georgia, the Carolinas, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and eventually across the Mississippi River into Louisiana. Along the way, he documented dozens of tribes facing alternative waves of diplomatic negotiation and violent confrontation. By 1542, after years of hardship, De Soto succumbed to a fever in what is now Louisiana. Leadership of the expedition passed to Luis de Moscoso Alvarado, who led the battered survivors westward through Texas and eventually to the relative safety of New Spain, modern-day Mexico. These harrowing expeditions represented the first recorded European encounters with Mississippian culture, and they left a deep impression not only on those who experienced them firsthand, but also on later generations. One such admirer was Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States, who would later see his expanding nation encroach upon the former lands of the Mississippians in the early 1800s. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, waves of European colonisation delivered a devastating blow to the remaining Mississippian chiefdoms. As more explorers and settlers arrived, the Mississippians without advanced weaponry or immunity to foreign diseases were increasingly unable to resist the pressure. Diseases such as smallpox, to which indigenous people had no natural defences, swept across the continent, decimating communities. Without the large populations needed to sustain their elaborate ceremonial cities and complex hierarchies, many Mississippians were forced to abandon their settlements and revert to smaller, nomadic tribal groups. The once dominant chieftain system collapsed, ill-suited to the brutal reality of a post-contact world. In time, those who survived began adopting aspects of European culture, notably horsemanship, which revolutionised hunting and mobility, but also marked a turning point. The culture that emerged was distinctly different from the traditional Mississippian way of life. And so, even before the founding of the United States of America, the world of the Mississippians, from the grandeur of Cahokia to the power of the chiefdoms, had already faded into history.
This summer, serve up the Cookout Classics, Heinz Ketchup, and Kraft Singles. Every good burger needs a layer of perfectly melty cheese and thick, rich ketchup. We all know it's not a cookout without Heinz and Kraft.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One.
Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
Thank you very much for listening to this History of the World podcast episode about the Mississippian culture. Now, this episode is actually a rewriting and a re-recording of a previous episode that was a special episode. You can find that episode if you explore back in the archive and you are a History of the World podcast subscriber on Spotify. So you can sign up. It's only £3 a month or something, $3 a month. And you can sign up and listen to all of the exclusive material on there. There's probably about 24 recordings on there. And also the original episode about the Mississippian culture. Now then, the Mississippian culture is an episode very close to my heart because it was commissioned by a very good friend of mine called Nick Barksdale, who ran the study of history, or the study of antiquity in the Middle Ages YouTube channel, I should say. And he was a great supporter of the History of the World podcast, and he also created a number of YouTube videos which contained my narrative. And I can't thank him enough for all the work that he put into my project. He remains to this day the greatest sort of benefactor of the History of the World podcast, if you like, the greatest supporter. And sadly, he lost his life at a very, very young age, just 3 years ago. And I, throughout all of the time I write this podcast, I'm always thinking of Nick, what a gentleman he was, and a great history enthusiast, and someone who I've mentioned many times in the past, someone who we greatly miss. And to this day, I never ever knew whether, because he was quite ill in his final months, I never ever knew whether he got the opportunity to listen to this episode about the Mississippians, which he was utterly fascinated in, and I never ever knew if he listened to it, which is a great shame for me. But anyway, that's the origin of this episode, and so it was my honour and privilege and a pleasure to write about it. Now, if you enjoy this podcast and you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our website, historyoftheworldpodcast.com. You can click on the Patreon link and sign up to make a monthly contribution. When you do this, you'll become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati, and you can qualify for gifts and rewards. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Threads, and Mastodon. And I'm always very, very keen to hear your feedback. So please don't hesitate to drop me a line at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And the feedback will be read out in the very rare History of the World podcast debrief episodes. And I'm due to publish one of them shortly. I'm sure it's been about 4 months since the last one, which is a huge amount of time to catch up on all your correspondence, but I will certainly do that. And I'm very interested to know what you thought of this particular episode. So, did you enjoy it? Was it a good presentation? Do you think I gave a fair representation of the Mississippian culture? And very interested in your feedback. Now, we've come to the end of our series on North American cultures. We've already done a number of episodes related to pre-Columbian North America. Now we have to travel all the way to sub-Saharan Africa, an area of the world which you haven't really given much attention to since Volume 1. And we uncover some hidden truths about sub-Saharan Africa before colonisation, before European arrival. And this is very important because it will help to dispel any myths or preconceptions that are had about pre-colonial Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. We're going to uncover some real glorious truths about this area of the world. So I can't wait to present that to you. But until that time, until next time, don't forget to write in, and also don't forget to be good.
The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Please consider making a financial contribution by going to the historyoftheworldpodcast.com website and clicking on the Patreon link. Email the show at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And don't forget to join our social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Tumblr. See you next time.